True Home Alone horror stories. Emily had always loved the quiet of her small cabin in the woods in Oregon. Nestled among tall trees, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, the house was the perfect place for her to immerse herself in books and silence. But there were nights when the quiet made her uneasy. It was such a night today. Outside, cold winds blew through the trees, making rustling sounds like whispers. Emily sat on the sofa, her book open, but her mind was no longer focused on the content. The pages gradually became blurred in the warm yellow light of the room. The feeling that something was wrong outside made her unable to take her eyes off the window. She reached out to pick up the hot cup of tea, trying to dispel the anxiety that was rising in her heart. But as her eyes swept past the transparent glass, she suddenly saw something moving outside the window. Her heart beat faster, and a creepy feeling spread throughout her body. Emily took a deep breath, trying to convince herself that it was just an illusion. But the silence around her only added to the tension. Looking outside again, she saw a white blur gliding between the trees. Eyes wide, Emily stood up, unable to resist curiosity and fear. She walked closer to the window, where the dim light of the desk lamp was not enough to illuminate the darkness outside. The scene became magical, but also full of horror. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through, causing the window to shake. Emily jumped back, and suddenly, she saw a woman standing at the window, only a layer of glass away from her. The woman was wearing an old white dress, her long hair hanging down to her shoulders. Her eyes were empty, as if there was no soul. It was hard to believe, but it seemed like the woman was looking straight at Emily, her eyes unblinking, without any expression. Emily's heart stopped. She couldn't speak. All she could do was stand there, frozen, not daring to move. The woman stood there silently for a long moment, before slowly turning around and disappearing into the darkness. Panic filled her, and Emily rushed out to check. She opened the window, and there was no one outside, just darkness and rustling leaves. "It's just an illusion," she told herself, but her heart was still pounding. She returned to the living room, looking around to make sure no one was there. As she turned around, a sudden chill came over her, as if there was a cold breath behind her. Emily felt that something was wrong, and when she looked at the reflection in the mirror, her heart skipped a beat. In the mirror, the figure of that woman appeared again, this time standing right behind her, so close that she could feel her presence. "No," Emily screamed, but her own voice came out as a whisper. She turned around, but the living room was completely empty. Panic shook her. She began searching for safety in every corner of the house, hoping that she could escape this nightmare. Suddenly, the lights in the room started flickering and strange sounds were heard. It was as if someone was knocking on the door. Emily carefully approached the main door, her hands shaking as she opened it. No one was there, but the light outside was dim, the moonlight hidden by dark clouds. As she turned around, a cold feeling enveloped her, and a whispering voice came from behind. "You shouldn't be here." Emily felt a chill down her spine. She turned around, but only saw pitch black darkness. She backed away, her foot hitting a chair, causing it to fall to the floor with a loud thud. Panicking, she rushed into her bedroom and slammed the door shut. She leaned against it, breathing heavily. Images of the pale-faced woman kept swirling through her mind. Why her? Emily wondered, why was she in her house? She closed her eyes, trying to calm herself. It was just an illusion, she repeated. But when she opened them again, she saw a white figure standing in the middle of the room, caught in the light from the window. In disbelief, Emily rushed out of the room, but the door suddenly refused to open. "Let go!" She screamed, but there was no response, only terrifying silence. She used all her strength to push the door open and finally managed to open it. Emily ran out, not knowing where she was running to, just hoping to escape that terrifying ghost. She ran through the woods, branches whipping at her face. She didn't dare look back, but she felt like someone was following her. Every step made her panic more and more. "I have to get out of here," she told herself. But her heart was pounding, and fear was slowly taking over her mind. She stopped, gasping for breath. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind her, and when she turned around, the woman was standing in the middle of the road, staring straight at her with empty eyes. Emily felt as if everything around her had stopped. Time had frozen. She knew she couldn't run forever. The woman began to move closer, and Emily felt a strong pull at her. "You shouldn't leave this place," the voice said in a whisper, cold and mysterious. "This house needs you." "No, I don't belong here," Emily cried out, but the woman only smiled, her eyes glinting strangely. She couldn't take it anymore. Emily turned and ran towards the house. When she entered, she felt a cold wind blowing, as if someone had just passed by her. She ran straight to the living room and locked the door. Her heart was pounding. She leaned against the door, breathing heavily. But this peace didn't last long. Once again, the doorbell rang, and Emily knew that she couldn't just avoid it forever. She gathered all her courage, decided to face this terrifying thing. Emily opened the door, and a shadow suddenly rushed in. She saw the woman standing there, her eyes no longer blank, but dark. "You have to stay with me," she said, her voice different, as if some force was pulling her. The fear turned to helplessness. Emily felt drawn into those eyes. "Why?" she asked, but her voice sounded weak and frightened. "To know the truth," the woman replied. "This house has been forgotten. It needs a new soul to revive." "No, I can't," Emily cried out, but her legs had no strength left. She felt as if she were being buried in the woman's memories. Mark is a young man who has just moved into a new house in the suburbs of New York City. The house is spacious, with white walls and open spaces, making him feel like this would be the perfect place to start a new chapter in his life. But the quiet of the place sometimes makes him feel lonely. One night, Mark was working late at his computer, the light from the screen creating a hazy atmosphere around him. The sound of typing on the keyboard became the soundtrack to the silence of the house. But in the midst of his concentration, a sudden noise came from the bedroom door. The door creaked, as if someone was trying to open it. Mark looked up, his eyes glued to the door. "It must be the wind," he told himself, trying to keep going. But a few minutes later, the sound came again, this time clearer, as if someone was standing on the other side of the door. With a nervous feeling, Mark stood up and walked towards the door. As he placed his hand on the doorknob, a sudden blast of cold air swept past, making him shiver. "It's probably just the wind," he consoled himself and opened the door. The room was dark. No one was inside. Mark took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of fear. He turned and was about to close the door, but a faint moan came from inside the room, making him stop. Heart pounding, he stepped into the room. The air in the room was cold, and the dim light from the nightlight created strange patterns on the walls. Mark walked to the center of the room, but felt like someone was watching him. He turned around, but saw only a dark reflection in the mirror. A feeling of dread rose up in him, and as he stepped out of the room, the door suddenly slammed shut behind him. "Okay, just a hallucination," Mark whispered to himself. He decided to go back to his desk, but he couldn't concentrate. Strange sounds kept echoing in his head, as if something was waiting. As the night grew late, Mark decided to go to sleep. But as he lay in bed, the sound of the bedroom door rang again. The door slowly opened, but there was no one there. His heart beat faster, and he decided to get out of bed to check. This time, when he entered the bedroom, the light from the night light gave off a strange feeling. Mark looked around. Everything seemed normal. But when he went to the mirror, a blurry figure flashed right behind him. He turned around, but the room was completely empty. His heart stopped for a moment. Enough. He shouted, but there was no answer. He walked out of the room, determined not to return. But the following nights, nothing changed. The bedroom door still opened automatically, strange noises still rang out, and Mark began to feel uneasy. He tried to find out what was wrong with this house. Searching the internet, he discovered that this house had belonged to a previous family, and they had mysteriously disappeared. Curiosity got the better of Mark. He decided to ask his neighbors about the history of the house. His neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Henderson, seemed very careful when talking about the house. "Don't mess with it," she said in a serious tone. "This house has seen strange things. The previous family's bedroom door would open by itself, and they never found their daughter." V. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "The girl?" he asked. "Yes, she went missing when she was little, and no one has seen her since." "This house has always had a dark aura," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes becoming distant. Mark felt a surge of anxiety. He decided to go back and check the bedroom again. When he got home, he felt the atmosphere in the house was different. There was tension. When he opened the bedroom door, it opened automatically, as if waiting for him. He stepped inside, and this time, there was more than darkness. The faint scent of jasmine filled the air. "Just my imagination," he told himself. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw a shadowy figure standing right behind him. His heart pounded. He turned, but the room was empty. A feeling of panic took over. "Is anyone here?" he shouted. The answer was an eerie silence. Mark decided to leave the room and lock the door. But as soon as he closed the door, a knocking sound came from the other side, incessant. The unease returned. "Enough!" he shouted, but the knocking only grew louder. He turned around, but there was nothing but silence. Panting, he decided to call a close friend, David, to tell him what was going on. David arrived immediately, but as he entered the house, the strange feeling seemed to permeate the place. "Is there anything strange about this house?" David asked as they sat in the living room. "A lot," Mark sighed. "The bedroom door opens by itself, strange noises, and there's a figure I saw." David raised an eyebrow, curiosity clear in his eyes. "Do you want to check it out?" "Is there anything strange about this house?" David asked as they sat in the living room. "A lot," Mark sighed. "The bedroom door opens by itself, strange noises, and there's a figure I saw." David raised an eyebrow, curiosity clear in his eyes. "Do you want to check it out?" Mark hesitated, but curiosity overcame his fear. They both decided to go back to the bedroom. When they opened the door, it opened automatically again, but this time, Mark had the feeling that something was waiting inside. They entered the room, and the dim light from the nightlight cast strange shadows on the walls. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Did you see that?" he whispered. David nodded, but said nothing. They moved closer to the mirror, and when they looked into it, they saw the silhouette of a little girl with long hair and big eyes standing right behind them. "No, no," Mark shouted, turning around but seeing no one. "We have to get out of here," he said, but David didn't react. He stood still, mesmerized by the image in the mirror. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut, causing both of them to jump. "What the hell?" David shouted, hastily trying to open the door, but it was locked. Mark's heart was pounding like a drum, the feeling of dread growing. "We have to find a way out of here," he said, but no one heard. In his despair, a laugh rang out from the room, a sweet but mysterious voice. "Play with me." Mark and David looked at each other, their eyes filled with panic. They turned around, and the little girl's figure appeared more clearly, standing in the middle of the room, her eyes innocent yet filled with mystery. "Let me go," Mark shouted, but the girl just smiled, saying nothing. From behind, Mark felt a cold air, as if someone was standing close by. "We can't stay here much longer," David said, trying to open the door again, but couldn't. Suddenly, the girl came toward them. "I just want to play," she said, her voice as clear as the sound of dewdrops. "Play with me." Mark's heart sank. "We can't play," he said. "We have to go." But now the girl was right in front of them, her face full of innocence, but her eyes reflected a deep sadness. "I just want friends," she said, and Mark felt a pang of pity. "We'll be friends," Mark said, his voice shaking. "But we can't stay here." She looked at him, and there was silence. Finally, she smiled. "Fine, but you won't forget me, will you?" Mark felt drawn to her eyes. "No, I won't," he replied, though he was panicking inside. Suddenly, the door opened, as if in response to his promise. They rushed out, not daring to look back. When they got outside, they both collapsed to the ground, their hearts still pounding. "We have to get out of here now," David said, his voice shaking. Mark nodded, saying nothing. They ran out of the house, not once looking back. But as they turned, Mark heard laughter echoing from inside the house, a sweet but mysterious sound. "Don't forget me," her voice rang out, a haunting reminder. They kept running until darkness enveloped the forest. When they reached David's house, Mark knew he had escaped the strange house. But the image of the little girl was still imprinted in his mind. Even though he had left, a part of him knew that the haunting of her would never go away, and the memories of that house would always haunt him in his dreams. Perched on a small hill in the middle of a vast Texas field, there is an old house that has existed for over 100 years. With its shabby tile roof and faded wooden walls, this house once belonged to a wealthy family, but was abandoned after a terrible tragedy. As time passed, the story of the house was forgotten until Jane and her husband, Mike, decided to buy it to start a new life in the peaceful suburbs. Jane has always loved old houses with old charm. When she saw the house at an estate sale, she was immediately drawn to it. The house had the old-world atmosphere she was looking for, and with the sale price being much lower than expected, they couldn't pass up the opportunity. Mike, initially hesitant, agreed with Jane after considering the factors. They thought it would be a great place to raise a family. After moving in, they began to decorate and renovate the house. The house was spacious, with a large living room and an old wooden rocking chair next to the fireplace. Jane was particularly fond of this chair. It had an antique feel, reminding her of her childhood when she used to sit in her grandmother's rocking chair. But Mike, despite being a practical person, felt that there was something strange about it. He often teased Jane, calling it the haunted chair. The story begins when Mike goes away on a business trip for a week, and Jane is home alone. The first night Mike is away, everything is normal. Jane enjoys a quiet evening, reading and listening to music. But the second night, strange things start to happen. Around midnight, Jane was lying in bed, almost asleep, when she suddenly heard a noise coming from downstairs. It was a soft, steady, familiar sound, the sound of something rocking. She opened her eyes, listened carefully, and realized it was the rocking chair. Jane thought to herself that perhaps the wind had blown in through the window and made the chair shake. But then she remembered that the window had been closed before she went to bed. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but tried not to panic. Jane decided to go down to check. As she walked up the creaking wooden stairs, Jane felt more and more nervous. When she reached the living room, the rocking chair was swaying slowly, as if someone was sitting on it, pushing it gently with their feet. But there was no one in the room. There was no wind, nothing that could move the chair. Feeling a chill, Jane quickly turned off the light and returned to her bedroom. She tried to convince herself that it was just a normal phenomenon, maybe the uneven wooden floor or something natural. She closed her eyes and forced herself to sleep, but could not forget the image of the chair rocking in the dark. The rocking continued in the following nights. Sometimes Jane heard it just as she was falling asleep. Sometimes it woke her up in the middle of the night. She went down to the living room several times to check, and each time she found the rocking chair slowly swaying in the dark, but there was no sign of who or what was behind it. Jane began to feel uneasy. One morning, she decided to investigate the house. During her research, she discovered that the house had belonged to a wealthy family in the early 20th century. The wife of this family had died in a tragic accident, and afterward, her husband had spent the rest of his life sitting in a rocking chair near the fireplace, remembering his dead wife. He died in this very chair after suffering a stroke one winter night. The story of the man in the chair's death sent a chill down Jane's spine. She began to feel that something was wrong with the house and the rocking chair. But she still didn't want to tell Mike about her experiences, afraid that he would think she was imagining things or being influenced by old stories. One night, as Jane sat in the living room reading, she decided to face her fear. The rocking chair sat quietly in the corner of the room as if challenging her. Jane stared at it, trying to find any sign that it would start rocking again. She even tried sitting on the chair, but nothing happened. Everything was quiet and normal, as if the strange phenomena were just a figment of her imagination. But just as she stood up and was about to leave the room, the chair began to shake. Not slowly like before, but violently, shaking each time as if someone was sitting on it angrily. Jane stood there, unable to believe her eyes. Before her eyes, the chair was moving at a furious speed, and once again, there was no one in the room but her. The rocking sound of the chair echoed throughout the quiet house. Jane panicked. She rushed upstairs, slammed the bedroom door, and hid under the covers like a child. But she could not sleep. The rocking sound continued to resound steadily, as if the chair was trying to communicate something to her. The next morning, Mike returned. Jane, exhausted and scared, finally told her husband about what she had been through over the past week. At first, Mike laughed and said that it was just Jane being too stressed. But when he saw her pale face and dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, he began to believe that something was really wrong. Mike decided to check the chair out for himself. He sat down, gave it a little push, and it rocked like a normal rocking chair. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. But as soon as he stood up and turned away, the chair rocked again, slowly and vaguely, like a haunting goodbye. After that, both Jane and Mike decided to move the chair out of the house, not wanting it to continue haunting them. They took the chair to a nearby antique shop and never looked back. From the day the chair left the house, the strange phenomena also disappeared. The house became quiet as before, and Jane gradually felt at peace again. But every time she thought about that rocking chair, a cold feeling still ran down her spine. The antique shop owner said the chair was quickly sold to an antiques enthusiast. Little did they know that it carried with it the story of a dead man and the secrets that house held. And since then, the rocking chair has continued to rock, but this time in another house, waiting for someone to sit on it and discover its secrets. If you find the story interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for the next video.